History is littered with amusing predictions about how life would be in the 21st century. But our day-to-day existence is a far cry from the flying cars and regular trips to the moon that were envisaged. Instead, millions are tuned in to their phones, tablets and online devices to find they've been called a nonce during an argument on Facebook. The increased connectivity means politicians can broadcast their messages to millions of voters with the click of a button, can make clear their stance on any issue they wish, and interact with the electorate. However, while these platforms enable greater reach and a chance to raise the issues that matter most to them, there are concerns about the way people interact with one another. During the course of this programme, I'll be talking to those who hope to benefit from the power of social media, those who have been the target of online abuse, and industry experts who understand the pros and cons of the sites which have become immersed in modern culture.
The offensive, the abusive, the misleading posts, they seem to be growing.
We've created this new, inverted commas, Wild West of communication.
I don't think there's a very strong correlation between success in elections and activity on social media.
The generation that comes after me are going to be people who have been online since they've been socially aware at all, and we're yet to see the total effects of that.
Facebook and Twitter were first established in the mid-noughties before rising to prominence a bit later in the decade. As memberships on the sites soared, it became clear the platforms could be used as a tool for political campaigning. The tech-savvy generation of the 90s had an upper hand on their older generation as they'd grown up with computers. David Christian, the leader of Douglas Council, who was first elected to the local authority in 1987, has first-hand experience of how social media has changed the political landscape.
I keep a record from when I first stood in the council, so I've got albums of newspaper cuttings, particularly the year that I was mayor, for example. And over a couple of Saturday nights, I started scanning some of these in, and some of them had over 200 comments added to them, where people were saying, particularly if it's old buildings that are gone or things like that, and people saying, God, never even seen this, or didn't know that was there, or I remember all that debate at the time. And that was a real good way of communicating with people, but communicating with people on a positive footing. Then you'd start getting an awful lot of friend requests coming through, and you would think, well, I don't know you at all. And in those days you would accept. I think everybody wanted to grow their friend list, to be honest with you. But then it was people who just wanted to make contact with you so they could send a message on Messenger, and it was a housing issue. It was some other political issue. So rather than using the normal methods of get you on the telephone or email you, or should I say even drop you a line sort of thing, everyone was just trying to do it. Or lots of people were then saying, no, I'll just do it through Facebook and contact you.
So it was becoming clear that people were seeing this as a way of contacting you directly, not about a social or fun issue or to keep in touch with you because you're an old friend. This was being used as a way of you communicating with the electorate. Yeah,
without a doubt. That was starting to become more obvious. And I would say it was more of the younger community that were doing it that way. I'll say certainly a lot of people who were wanting housing issues resolved or on the housing list, for example. You were getting an awful lot of messages through Messenger in that way rather than through the normal email system that the majority of people had started to use. The old dropping you a line, pen and paper was disappearing. But majority of people would contact you by email, but people suddenly think, well, do you know what, I can just do it now at midnight or whatever and send a messenger on Messenger if they've been accepted as a friend.
Laura Ann Williams is an industry expert who works for UK-based firm Get Social. She delves further into how behaviours online have changed since the social media sites first came to prominence.
When Facebook first arrived on the scene, there wasn't really any marketing that was going on, so it was literally just, this is a way to keep in touch with your friends. And now whenever I'm doing seminars or anything, I always say we use Facebook to stalk our ex-boyfriends or girlfriends and to see who we knew from school who got fat. So yeah, I think we do use it differently in that when Facebook first came out, it was almost like a brain dump in the same way that Twitter is. So it would literally just be, you just tell everybody exactly what you're doing. And I think we've stopped doing that quite so much now, at least on Facebook, because I think we've kind of learned that it's not always a great idea to just say the first thing that comes into your head.
One man who's never known public life without sites like Facebook, however, is Mr Christian's fellow councillor Devon Watson. Winning a by-election in 2020, he's always seen the platform as a way to promote the causes that he feels need addressing.
Oh, it's absolutely vital. It allows me to talk about things that would otherwise never really get a mention. People of different social classes never interact. So a multi-millionaire who's moved to the Isle of Man for tax purposes and a working class person, generally they don't go to the same restaurants, they don't go to the same pubs, they typically don't both ride the bus. The only time in which they can hear the views of the other is through social media, and it's important to be an intermediary to allow these conversations to happen in that way. Otherwise, they just wouldn't happen.
So it's important for raising particular issues, but what about using it as a tool to canvass for votes, to make your stance clear on a particular issue and to reach out to potential new voters?
I think it's been really important. I mean, I think particularly when you talk to young people, it's very, very difficult for a candidate to get into flats and get into apartments. And a lot of young people just don't really spend much time reading newspapers or listening to the radio. So social media is where people are. Currently on the Isle of Man, we've got 57,000 people actively using Facebook, which means it's where a lot of people are and it's where they can sort of absorb and interact with news. Otherwise, people just don't have any access to the political system.
If you were to say to somebody who had never even heard of social media, how would you describe what its purpose is?
Ultimately, its purpose is to communicate with other people.
Michael Josem is standing to win a seat in the House of Keys, and his social media game is strong. As simple as that?
Yeah, like it's a tool, right? And so you can communicate in manners that educate people, that entertain people, that inform people, and to do bad things. And much like any other communication tool, there's a lot of people in the history of this planet who have used radio for nefarious purposes. There are a lot of people who have used print media for nefarious purposes. A lot of people have used TV for nefarious purposes. But it's just a communication tool.
You seem to have developed quite the presence on Facebook and Twitter. When did you realise that if used effectively, this could be a really powerful tool?
So I don't think of social media as a powerful tool. I just think of it as a tool to communicate with my friends and people who I share an interest with. And so I don't think there's any ulterior agenda or motive there. It's just a tool to communicate to and with people.
But do you not feel that it is a big advantage to a political candidate if they are able to use social media effectively, if they are good at using social media?
Look, possibly, but there's a difference between what happens and what people talk about on social media and what happens when people cast votes in elections. And so I don't think there's a very strong correlation between success in elections and activity on social media.
His view that it's a technology that needs to be embraced is one that's shared, although Devon Watson believes those who engage more online do give themselves a greater chance of success at the ballot box.
I think it's one of those political shifts that we're witnessing. I mean, when newspapers came out, candidates who were able to effectively use newspapers did better than those who didn't. Those who were able to effectively used radio or television did better than those who didn't. Those who were really good at talking to mass numbers of voters when democracy was opened. So what we've seen today is social media allows a democratization of information, and politicians who are better at engaging with ones who are less afraid of actually putting their views out there and actually maybe sometimes even having an argument, they're going to do better than ones who don't. And it's interesting to see how these two worlds really collide. As politics becomes less about personality and more about ideas.
So you feel that technology has always been advancing, and politicians, if they want to win public support, have always had to evolve with the times, and this is just the latest chapter in that.
Yeah, and I'm sure at some point there is going to be some sort of technological shift that is also going to make life harder for me if I'm unable to adapt at some point. But I think there's a lot of people who are absolutely excellent at using social media. So I don't think it really sort of breaks down 100% around age. I think it's mostly built around adaptability. And that's a sort of quality that you want in politicians. The sort of politician that's able to adapt to this environment is probably going to be more likely to be able to adapt to changing social and economic conditions. And that's a sort of quality I think that we should select for in leaders long term.
The remarks about those being afraid to express views or have an argument online are pertinent. Scour the net long enough and you'll come across a post splitting opinion. That may not be uncommon. People have had political disagreements since the dawn of time, whether that be in a town hall, round a pub table or in a coffee house. What's different, according to David Christian, is the toxic nature the conversations often seem to take.
I've had instances in the past where we've actually complained because there has been abusive comments put on, lies have been told, asked for the comment to be taken down, and of course by the time the comment is removed or that posting is removed, it's been shared and shared and shared. So the damage is done and it keeps getting circulated. I'm often absolutely dumbfounded if the people who are putting these comments on actually believe what they're saying, because some of it's just absolute nonsense. People will often say to me, "Hey David, you're getting the back torn out of you over such and such an issue." And, "Oh, am I?" Well, do you know what? They're leaving somebody else alone if they're having a go at me. But what's really bad about it is the way that affects those closest to you. And I'm afraid it does affect those closest to you. And I've had this from many, many people who will say, yes, people in politics, you've got to have broad shoulders, you should be able to take it on the chin, but you shouldn't have to take the personal abuse. And your loved ones, your family members, if you've got children or whatever, they shouldn't have to read some of the stuff that is put online. And as I say, by the time you may succeed in getting it removed, the damage is done. You know, and the hurt is there with loved ones. And I've seen that happen, and I've had it within my own family where that has happened, but I've had numerous other people. I've had other people who have bowed out of politics because of it, because people within their family were being affected by some of the comments that were being put on, and there's no need for that. I'm all for freedom of speech and open debate. You know, that's the society we live in, and let's hope that never changes. But, you know, it must be correct what's being put on.
You know, the internet has given us this wonderful thing of anonymity. You know, we can make up names, we can misrepresent ourselves, you know, we can become entirely different people, and there's nothing for anybody to turn around and say, well, that's not really you. So, you know, we do have this serious disconnect when there's a computer screen or a phone screen in front of us or between us and the person that we're talking to. We just kind of almost forget that they're human. And again, I don't know if that's because we can't physically see them, we can't see how they're reacting to something. So, you know, if you said something horrible to someone's face, you would see where it lands. You know, you would see that it hurts them, or you'd see them kind of do a double take and be like, what did you just say to me? Really? But we don't get that online.
Considering we're talking about divisive issues, it appears we've found something that all politicians agree on. You shouldn't be immune from criticism if you want to hold public office, but there seems to be a more personal, aggressive undertone to much of the flack that's aimed in their direction.
Certainly it is fair and reasonable for people to have differing policy disagreements. And so, you know, when we are talking about the future of our nation, you know, there should be great passion and there should be great feeling about what we say and what we do and what we think. But I think that threatening people is inappropriate and it is criminal, and it should be criminal. And I think that we've got to differentiate between different sorts of things on the internet. And so it is fine and acceptable to disagree with a random politician about their policy. I think it is poor form to criticise them on their appearance or their demographics, whether it be of race, religion, or any other demographic. And it should be deeply criminal to make genuine threats and to make genuinely incite people to cause harm to others.
And then it comes to regulation. Is it possible to adequately and fairly police what people say without infringing on freedom of speech? And just when does an insulting comment cross the line? On that, it seems even industry experts are unaware.
It seems to be a very tricky thing at the moment to get things that are actually abusive removed from social media, as opposed to things that might be misconstrued. there's loads of women who get death threats, they get rape threats, they get all sorts coming at them over social media after they've, said something like, I support a woman's right to choose. Abortion is healthcare. It should be accessible to everyone. And then, you can get this backlash from people going, well, actually, you should just go to hell because, it's completely against my beliefs. And actually, if I see you, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to shoot you, this kind of thing. And the people who are saying that don't get banned, which is very confusing to me in that I really don't actually understand how the system works. I don't know how horrific something has to be in order for it to get banned.
And who should be in charge of policing that content? Should the onus be on the owners of Facebook, or should it be on the operators of individual Facebook pages?
Yeah, and again, that's a really, really sticky question because, we're kind of like, yes, definitely, Facebook should, take responsibility for what they've unleashed into the world. But at the same time, if Facebook started censoring things, there would be a complete uproar about that, because we'd be going, well, who are you to tell me what I can and can't say? Who are you to decide? Who's going to come in and say, well, actually, you've stepped a bit too far there, so I'm going to mute you for however long.
I really do believe that is very difficult, and for any organisation such as the radio station that posts news on a daily basis and all that, it'd be very hard to regulate it. But I think, all these organisations need somebody trained in this area. They need to be able to think, hang on a minute, do you know what? That is not true, because we covered the story and we did the homework and we've got the facts, and those comments there, that is just untrue. They shouldn't be there. They should be removed.
You're calling for the Facebook police there, though, aren't you?
Some way it's got to be with the main people, so it's got to be the likes of Facebook. They've got to take more control over what is taking place, without a doubt. But it's got to come down to the individuals who are posting, the organisations that are posting. They've got to have some sort of ability to be scanning on a regular basis, not just saying this site is not manned, is not looked at. Until we get a complaint, we don't do anything about the comments that are there. Because I'm sorry, that site gets shared and shared and shared, and the damage is done. And I think on the Isle of Man, one thing it is definitely doing, we are a small island, many people know each other, it is turning people off politics. And I mean that in two ways. It is turning people off wanting to stand for politics on the Isle of Man, but it's also turning people away from politics, because they're just getting fed up with some of the stuff that they are reading.
To what extent do we allow the government to impede on freedom of speech? And if we end up protecting people against abuse is absolutely necessary, and I think this is something that a lot of people face. It discourages a lot of really good people from going to politics. Abuse is absolutely unacceptable, and if someone says something threatening or hateful or dangerous or threatening, then yes, we need to sort of have a way of sort of ensuring people are safe. But this can't sort of extend into... I have a worry that if the government were to implement strong regulations, what's to prevent the government from declaring too much criticism of the prom, or too much criticism of the horse trams, or government overspend, or shredding public services as abusive? Because anyone can sort of say that the criticism of poor performance is an attack on someone else as a person, or potentially threatening. So I guess there are concerns on both ends.
And that ultimately is the opposing argument. 18-year-olds in the war took bullets to defend freedom of speech, and now the snowflake generation is calling for intervention because of a few hurty words. Should those in the public eye need to develop thicker skin? Should the authors of hateful tweets face action? Or does the answer lie somewhere in between? Perhaps it's that refusal to accept a nuanced opinion on the matter which has made certain corners of social media so hostile. Whatever the answer, it could mean we miss out on the chance to elect candidates from across the political divide.
It's so complex, it's just incredibly fascinating because nobody quite knows what the right answer is. So it's kind of, we've created this new, inverted commas, Wild West of communication where there are no sheriffs, where nobody is deciding what's right and what's wrong. I think possibly because we're all a bit too frightened to step forward and say, actually, I don't think that's okay, because we're worried that people are going to then come for us in turn. So it can end up being a very toxic atmosphere.
I think it's a real sadness. And it's difficult to measure in numbers or to answer the question with any detail. But I have friends who tell me, hey, Michael, look, I love what you're doing and standing up for the community. I could never do it because I don't want to subject my children to that. Or I don't want to do it because I could never subject my husband to that. And in that sense, it is it's sad. And we can't measure the loss. There's no way of measuring that in any objective sense. But that's why I think the answer is we got to have, and I keep coming back to this idea, we got to have a happy and healthy institution so that people are able to feel loved and to take a stand for such issues.
Do you think a politician can be successful in the modern age without a social media presence?
Well, I think that almost the vast majority of our existing Manx politicians have very low social media profiles So I think that the proof is in the pudding. I was very active on social media, and when I stood for election last year to Douglas South, I was defeated by candidates who were a lot less engaged, and so the proof is in the pudding. My past unsuccessfulness is in itself evidence of that.
I think it can have a huge impact. I think, even for the people who are saying, I've got broad shoulders, I can take it, you can only take so much. If you're getting like 100 negative comments a day, as opposed to 1 out of 100 comments, then it's going to have a massive impact on you. It doesn't matter how strong, inverted commas, a person you think you are. If you've just got someone who's constantly shouting at you, it's going to hurt. It's like, if you imagine you're being followed by a person who's just poking you on the shoulder in the same spot for 24 hours. It doesn't hurt that much to begin with. In fact, it's annoying. But, after a couple of hours, you're going to start getting a bruise because they're hitting you in exactly the same spot constantly and they're not stopping.
There are no definitive answers to any of the questions I've posed in this programme, only subjective ones. If that's annoyed you, there are plenty of platforms you can take to voice your displeasure. Do you think, personally, social media has made our lives better or worse?
Personally, yeah. I'm able to interact with people I otherwise would never be able to interact with. I'm able to communicate with folks and keep in touch with friends. I am an immigrant, so I'm able to keep in touch with family. I'm able to interact with ideas and concepts and media that I otherwise never would have. I'm enriched in it. And I think that part of the reason why it's so addictive is because it does provide value. Being connected to more people is something we always like, and I think as human beings we always seek connection. And if social media allows us to do that, then it's a tool.
Good question. I think basically with everything I've just said, I would say worse. I would say I know many people that before they had Facebook in their life were a lot happier. I know people now who can't spend 30 minutes without checking their Facebook account. Constantly on it. When you're even at a restaurant, the phone's out and they're looking at their Facebook account. Just spoils a good social evening. So in many ways, I think from that point of view, I would say worse.
I think it's both. I think it's made our lives better in that we're able to talk to more people, and we're able to talk to people who are different to us, so that we don't walk around in our own little bubbles with no concept of what other people are going through in life. I think it's made it worse in the sense that nothing is ever forgotten now. So it's more difficult for us to make mistakes and then atone for those mistakes, because it's something that will be continuously thrown back at us. And yeah, again, I'm quite ambivalent about social media. I love and hate it at the same time.
I think it's made us better because it's enabled us to speak to more and different people. And I think that throughout the history of humanity, we've had a whole series of moral panics about new communication. But over time, as humans change and our community changes, we overcome those problems. And so I think that in the long term, social media is just a new way to speak to different people.